And we are live.
Welcome to Launchpad, the unique radio show and podcast that celebrates new book releases and the authors that created them. Now, let's take off with your host, Grace Sammon.
Welcome to episode 2 of Launchpad. I'm Grace Sammon. This episode's authors will guide you through historical fiction, a spiritual journey, and engaging stories of family challenges and triumphs. The voices of Desiree Nana, Leslie Kain, Gloria Mattioni, and Suzanne Moyers hail from Italy, Africa, Mexico, and the US. But today they blend beautifully on Launchpad, and we'll hear about their stories and their books and their debut novels. And true stories. Launchpad airs before a live audience, so we encourage everybody to make comments and feel free to let us know what you're doing, where you are, ask questions, and leave your name in the chat so everybody can engage in the process. So here we are on episode 2. I'd like to start out with Desiree Nana. Tell us about your amazing book. It's a spiritually compelling book which tells a story of your journey through birth to the present day, with tales of success, betrayal, and some surprising results.
Oh, yes. My book, much like Joseph, it's a very compelling story, like you say. It's a story of my life that just happened to be like this. That happened to be similar to the story of Joseph in the Bible, the son of Jacob. For those that know the story of Joseph in the Bible, they know the hardship that he went through. My story, I went through a lot of hardship that are really similar to that of Joseph. And so my book is about my story. And I grew up in Cameroon, and by the grace of God, I came to the United States. And so in my book, I describe the condition in which I was living in Cameroon. So when you read my story, you're gonna find out how fortunate people don't know how fortunate they have here in the United States. They don't know how fortunate they have here. That people are so blessed in this country, they don't have any idea how other people live elsewhere. So my story is just my struggle in Cameroon to have a better life. But God's intervention was so mighty, the such way that my story just keeps stunning people. So I spent I spent like 10 years in the Navy, in the US Navy. So every time I was telling about my story to people in the US Navy, they always come up with the conclusion that my story is just like the story of Joseph. So that's why the title of my book comes from friends that they always say my story. When I tell my story to anybody, they always come out to the conclusion, for those that know the story of Joseph, that your story is just like the story of Joseph. So it is a story of struggle, a story of success, a story of miracle, how God worked behind the scene to make things happen into our life when we least expected him to do something. How God is so powerful, because when Joseph was thrown in the pit, and I believe he thought that everything was done. He thought I was. I thought. I'm sorry. He thought that he don't have any future anymore. But God.
Well, it is an amazing and very compelling story.
Yes.
How you came here,
Yes.
and overcame poverty, served our country for many years, and have an MBA. So I want us to interact with our other authors as well, because we also have Leslie Kain here, who also writes about gangs, which Desiree actually experienced. But Leslie Kain's book, Secrets in the Mirror, is an upmarket family drama with domestic suspense. Leslie has spent many, many years in the area of mental health, and that is very much reflected in her book, Secrets in the Mirror. Leslie, let's know more about you and your book.
Well, the book was born of knowledge of some siblings who, one of the siblings developed narcissistic personality disorder and made her sister's life miserable. So I began with 2 male twins, identical mirror twins, who looked alike, exactly like on the outside, but were very much reverse inside. And that was exacerbated by a very bullying father who was connected with the mob, the Boston mob. It was based in Boston. And he picked one of his twins to be the winner, the best from the very beginning and assigned the other twin the role of nerd or wimp. And oh, by the way, your sole mission in life is to take care of your brother and keep him out of trouble. Well, that developed a dynamic so that the poor wimp brother, with the gaslighting imposed on him by the winner twin, Gavin failed to develop his own agency, his own ability to make his own decisions, run his own life. And with his father's bullying and his brother's gaslighting, it was very difficult. But then his brother couldn't keep him out of trouble, started getting involved with the Boston mob and crime and substance abuse. And pretty soon that's bled over into Gavin, the good twin, and his life was in danger from the mob. And so Gavin had to escape with his new wife to Kauai and build a life, but he couldn't escape his brother, his psychopathic brother, or the mob. So it's a story of trying to decide, do I save my brother or do I save myself?
Very compelling as well. Gloria also writes about siblings and saving each other. So Gloria has a wonderful contemporary women's fiction out called California Sister, and it's the stories of two sisters and love and cruel fate. Gloria, tell us about your book.
Yes, exactly. It's a story of two sisters living worlds apart, one in Los Angeles and the other one in the city of Bergamo in North Italy. And they get reunited in their home country by medical emergency. And so what happened is the narrator is a mystery writer who must solve an impossible dilemma. When her sister suffers a brain hemorrhage and can no longer speak for herself. Would her sister wants to go on struggling, damaged as she is, or she would prefer to die with dignity? So it's a terrible dilemma that she has to face, the first one in her life that she can solve as a writer. And the big question lingers in the background. And it's something that everybody can relate to, and is, can anybody know what's best for others? And that's a very, very important question that I think everybody can struggle with during their lives when they have to face it. And so what happened in the book is that following her sister's brain stroke, Claire Waters, 43-year-old mystery writer, very successful writer, rushes to Italy to help her sister. And she doesn't know what's going to happen. She obtains power of attorney because her sister is in a coma. And she's totally determined to either restore her to health or help her die with dignity. And the two sisters, even though they had an ocean in the middle, they have remained very close. So they're very different. Claire is totally a lone wolf who values freedom above all else, while Ondina, the sister in Italy, is wise, cautious, a people person with many friends. But when Ondina wakes up after 28 days in a coma, is trapped in a body that doesn't respond to her commands, she's unable to speak, move, even eat or breathe without the help of a GI tube and a tracheostomy. So Claire decides to remain in Italy at her sister's bedside, forsaking her career and Los Angeles life. And she tries everything to raise her spirit, but it takes a whole year for her to surrender enough to listen to her silent sister.
And Suzanne's book also is very much about sisters and helping each other through life. Suzanne, tell us about your book, Till All These Things Be Done.
Yes, my story was inspired by something that happened when I was 16, and I witnessed my grandmother, who was living with us at the time, calling out to her father, her long lost, long deceased father, Papa, help me. Please come back. Why did you leave? I was only 16 when that happened, but I started asking questions about this chapter of our family history that I really knew nothing about. And that story stayed with me. And so when I started writing about 10 years ago, this was the narrative that came out of me. It's very, very loosely based on the story of 16-year-old Leola Rideout, who in 1919 must grapple not only with the pandemic that's raging across East Texas at the time, but poverty and the social turmoil that's going on, very reminiscent of what we're experiencing now. And her father's disappearance, unexplained disappearance from their home. They were a loving family. He loved his kids, and he disappeared. So mostly she has to focus on keeping her little sisters alive and staying alive during the pandemic and with everything else going on. And she sort of buries that loss, and it kind of comes back to her over the decades. And she continues to refuse to confront it because she's fairly certain there's some kind of terrible betrayal involved, and she has some clues as to his whereabouts. But in her old age, she starts having these visions of her father, and it forces her to look at this ancient loss and to confront it once and for all, and leading her to a remarkable family discovery that could finally bring the peace and forgiveness she needs.
So each of your stories is so deeply rooted, whether it's nonfiction in the case of Desiree, or in our novels about family and the impact that it has on our lives. What made any of you choose to write these stories and write these stories now? Desiree's story has launched just a few months ago, and the other three of you all have launches this month. So why this story and why now?
Well, I mentioned that I was inspired by a friend's two daughters, where one of them began developing narcissistic personality disorder and gaslighting the other. And my thinking just evolved, and then was inspired further by certain public figures having malignant narcissistic personality disorder, which is very topical in these times. And the story just grew. And the way I write is that I deeply interview my characters so that I know them better than I know myself. And they come to me and redirect the story, send it off in directions I hadn't anticipated, bother me in my dreams, tell me where I'm going wrong and what needs to happen in the story. And it just evolves, and it becomes a much bigger story than I originally planned. So it worked out well.
The writing journey is amazing. Desiree, why now? You've had such a rich military career. You have your master's degree. Why this story and why now?
My story now is, I mean, this story will have, if you have, I had listened to the Lord, I would have written these stories maybe years ago, but I procrastinated for years. But when this pandemic just came, and because when I got out of the military, I went to work for the Department of Defense for DoD for like a year. But since I love construction, I quit my job to start my little company. But this Corona just came and knocked everything down, and just messed up everything. So I found myself home doing nothing, and the Lord just said, "It's time for you now to read the story." So this story is not just for people. It's not just for Christians. It's just a story of it's a story of perseverance. It's a story of somebody that want to make something happen into his life, just like Joseph. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and to make things happen into his life, you have to have some type of discipleship. You have to disciple yourself. You have to have a discipline in everything that you do, and that's what Joseph did. It was very disciplined, and he knew that there's something that I can do, because it gonna mess up my future. When you read, for example, when you run away from the wife of you can't call her princess. Um, I mean, that you run away from adultery, and because he knew what he wanted, he knew that I have a big objective to reach, and that's what my book is about somebody that's struggling in life, but have God on his side and was able to make it happen.
So life lessons for each of us
Yes.
in your story, no matter what. Gloria, your story is also an important one, but why now? Why, none of us are young. We've all procrastinated, as Desiree says, to write
Me
these
too,
stories.
because my story is also inspired by my personal experience and what happened to my own sister. Because in 2006, I found myself in the same situation that my main character finds herself in. So I received a call from Italy informing me that my sister, my healthy, still young sister, suffered a brain stroke all of a sudden. And I rushed to Italy. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I found her alive or dead, and what the future would have in store for her, for me. I didn't know how long I was going to stay. I basically ran there with only my computer bag and what I had on my back, because I had no idea. And that happened in 2006, and it took me at least, I think, 6 or 7 years to be able to go back to the pain of writing about. I couldn't write a memoir, so I decided to write a novel. And the reason why I did, like with Leslie, is because I wanted to give back my sister. I wanted to give her back her voice, the voice that she lost. And I tried different situations, different ways to write, until I could hear her voice in my head. And that's why it's a dual narration story, even if the main narrator is the mystery writer.
Oh, I love that. And that's a very hard piece to write, I think, that dual narration. I'm always intrigued when authors are able to do that. So you wanted to give your sister a voice, and Suzanne heard a voice as well. So Suzanne,
I
tell us
did.
a little bit more about why now? Why is this the right time for this book? And what would readers want to pick up from it?
Well, interestingly, when I started revising the book, I had the basic story based on this scaffolding of my family history, which was great. And then I did a ton of research on what's called Blacklands, Texas, in 100 years ago. It was fascinating. My family is from that region. Originally, I was born in the Northeast, but there was so much I didn't know. And as I did my research, and this was like maybe 8 years ago, and it was beginning of the rise of the alt-right and of the Proud Boys and the Oath Takers or the Oath Keepers. So this was becoming a very relevant topic in our society again, as it has been so often. And I was stunned to find that not only in Texas, but in 1919, 1920, throughout the country, white supremacy was a commonly believed ideology.
Well, remember Tulsa, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and I was just stunned by how ubiquitous that mentality was, especially in a place like Texas that had this history of racial oppression. And so I rewrote the book. Now, the most important point of my book is not about the racism, but it's really had to be part of the setting. And my character is white, but I had to embed her worldview that she had been taught into the book, because it was everywhere. This was just everywhere, and all aspects of society. And my white character, Leola, does have her consciousness is raised as a young adult, and she has to really grapple with the hypocrisy of her do unto all others culture, her Protestant culture, with the reality and the hypocrisy. So it felt important. I'm a mission-driven writer, but I also hope that this is a universal story about one person's coming to grapple with a deep down loss. But it did feel really relevant for the time. And by the time I finished it, which was a few years ago, wow, it's been 100 years, and this is coming up again, and we're still processing this history. So
Grace, you're right. There are so many similarities among our books. Gloria, you had a dual voice, dual POV. In my book, the two twins take turns, but only in the beginning and only in the end. So you get really deep into their heads through the first person in those breakout chapters. And Suzanne, my main character, his very best friend, his savior really, is an African-American guy. And my main character is, upper class, white, that kind of thing. And, who knew? But the book spans 1994 to 2005. And a lot of things like that are going on about racial conflict. And the best friend ends up tutoring the main character on what reality is with racism. So it's great to see these serendipities.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just really quickly, like there is a character named George Gums in my novel who is a childhood friend of Leola's, the protagonist. And he has just served in World War I, as many African Americans did. And then he gets home to the Deep South, and he has no benefits. He's still living in a Jim Crow society that denies him his basic freedoms. And he becomes an example to Leola. So they also have this, there's also him there, and he's sort of instructing her in the way he lives his life.
That's great.
I also found another similarity that, at least you tell me if I'm right, but it seems like all our books in some way have a passion to motivate, meaning even if they're novels and they're fiction, they still want to tell stories to give other people elements of reflection or motivate them to take charge of things. Am I right?
Yes.
Really.
Yes, Gloria, I agree with you. My book is just like you guys said. My book is very centered on motivation, to make people understand that life is what you make it. Life is what you want it to be. If you have goal, you set some goal, and you set some boundary, it's will be very easy for you to be successful. But that's my book. My book is actually motivate people to show people that I come from nowhere, and I was able to build a life for myself here in the United States, for example. Because when I came from Cameroon, I barely eat one meal in Cameroon in a day. So when I came here, I have a choice what to eat in the morning. It was very surprising. It was extraordinary because I didn't even know how the freeze looked like until I got here to the United States. I saw the freeze for the first time. So I had a choice. Back in Cameroon, I can't even eat in the morning, even though if there's no leftover left in the day before, we don't eat anything. But when I came here, I see a luxury to have a choice to wake up in the morning and decide what you're going to eat, what I'm going to eat. Sometimes you choose, sometimes it was very, very encouraging for me. But people don't know. Even in my book, also one thing that my book does is it talks a lot to. It's a book that talks to family, but it talks to teenager, college student as well, because they don't know. Children don't know how fortunate they have here. Now, college students don't even know how fortunate they have here. So when they read my book, they have a shift of mind. It changed their mind. It make them change the way they see things. This is that is very good for teenagers and college students because I described the way I was living back in Cameroon and the lack of opportunity that is in Cameroon. There's opportunity in Cameroon. There's like a work, all that stuff. But the system is so corrupt that you have to know somebody that knows somebody to be able to have anything. And we have
I
the same.
think, I'm sorry. I think the other thing, for all of you, you all come from very different cultural places.
Yeah.
So I liked that very much about each of your stories. So
Yeah.
how would you describe perhaps the importance of culture, Suzanne, in yours? And then let's just hear from the other authors as well.
That's an interesting question. As I said, I was born in Washington, D.C., and I've lived in the New York metropolitan region my whole life. But my parents are Southern or Texan, and we spent a lot of time in Texas growing up. And so there's so much rich culture. A lot of people see Texas in black or white, and it has a pretty bad rap at this point. But if you delve a little deeper, there's a lot of diversity and a lot of richness to that culture, which I sort of knew, but I also found in my research. And so I think it was really interesting for me when I started writing. I mean, I'm writing 100 years ago mostly, and Texan, and lots of colloquialisms. But I have to say, I was stunned, and other people have said, like, it just kind of flowed out on the page. It was like it was in my psyche somewhere, even though, we didn't speak 1920s Texan. But the cultural part of it, the structure of the grammar, I'm not a linguist and I don't claim to be. But I think the cultural part of it was really enriching for me in writing this book. And I hope people will get a lot from understanding that culture and reading the book.
Thank you. Leslie.
Well, that's a big question because I was born in San Diego and lived all over the United States and in dire and poverty situations. And so that really has nothing to do with this book, which is based in Wellesley and Cambridge, which is where I like to claim is my real home, because that's where I became who I am. And so I really do understand the Boston mob, the Harvard scene, the Wellesley scene, and I've spent some time in Kauai, so that it all comes through. But the culture of my formative years have nothing to do with this book.
And that's fair enough. Gloria, and then Desiree, and then we have to close.
Well, for me, is I came to live in the United States by choice in 1992 because I felt like Italy, with all its beauty and all the things that Americans love about Italy, all true. But for me, it was not up to my enterprising spirit. And I'm very much like a self-reliant person, a risk taker. And I was a journalist at the time in Italy. I've been a professional writer since I was 18. And I had a great career, but I was restless. I wanted to travel the world. At that time was not like now, that actually in magazines or newspapers, people are very happy to send you out. No? Mm-hmm. At the time, they wanted you to sit on your chair at your desk and stay there. And I was tired of that. So I started to travel on my own, and I realized that there was a market. And so I came here and I started to freelance and sell my stories, to produce them and sell them. And I loved Los Angeles for the diversity, because at that time in Italy, there was not so much diversity. Now there is, of course, because a long time went by. But in some way, there were many things that I appreciate about Italy that I couldn't find here. So it was really like to live in two worlds, because I was going back both for work and for family quite often. But writing the story is what made me realize how connected I still am with Italy, with many things. And my culture is I don't know, particularly about how people treat each other. That's very different. Like friendships are forever. I
Oh,
still have
that's
friends I met in middle school.
that's lovely because I was born in New York. I lived in DC for many years. I'm Italian. I'm Sicilian by culture. So I love that we also share some of those things. Desiree, let's finish up with you. The role of your culture, your original family of origin culture on your story.
I mean, the culture of myself. I actually have a chapter on my book that's called Culture Shock. Yeah, a culture shock because when I got to the United States, just like I was saying earlier, when I got to the United States, I saw how it was very easy to make a life, to make something happen in your life here, compared to Cameroon, when you have people with doctorate degree that on the street, on the street, they don't have no job, they don't have nothing to do. So here in the United States, I saw a lot of opportunity. And I was wondering why there's people on the street begging for money, or people. I see people that don't want to work. It was just a culture shock for me when I see people that don't want to work. The opportunity, you can go to school, you can get better your life, you can have some scholarship, you can do what I want to do here in the United States. But in Cameroon, it was not the same thing. In my book, I also mentioned the fact that this country was the foundation of this country is the founding father of this country had the grace of God, because this foundation of this country it was based on certain belief that really helped the country. But back in in Cameroon, we don't have the same culture. We have we don't know what they believe. We don't know what we don't have no direction. The country is run by the same person for almost 40 years, and it's different. It's different back in Cameroon just to have a job.
So culture, I'm sorry. So culture, commonalities, great stories. Each of your stories is so compelling. I want to thank each of you for being with me on the Storyteller's microphone and the Launchpad microphone today. I want to thank each of our listeners and our viewers. And today has been episode 2 of Launchpad. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode is copyrighted by Grace Sammon and Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Thank you for visiting with us on Launchpad.